Here we go. Episode 29 of Red versus Blue. My name is Mike Stark.
And I'm Keith Curry.
This week, we're going to talk about what went on in England in their election, because it does play a part into what we're doing. But before we do, we need to talk about a couple of other things that happened this past week. The immunity ruling. What does that bring to the table for everybody?
Well, the immunity ruling, broadly speaking, differentiates between official acts for president, which the court has declared are absolutely immune, and unofficial acts for which he can be prosecuted. Now, there are ways that the court made this decision that have political implications. First of all, the delay in the decision has pushed off, it looks like, all of the federal and the Georgia trials until after the election. It's also pushed off the sentencing in the New York hush money case until September, actually. So that's going to give Trump a window here. I think most people would say the president should not be prosecuted for, ordering troops into battle, or for taking out a dictator, or for, doing things in a covert way against our enemies. But they certainly left a pretty broad definition of official acts. And some of the discussion and the decisions suggest it's broader than it's ever been interpreted before. Trump can still be prosecuted. The allegation for most of his crimes are that they were not official acts of the president. We would certainly hope they would not be. But it's provided him a window of defense. It's provided him a window of time. And it's provided him to get out of the spotlight and have it moved to Biden in a way that's tremendously helpful to his campaign.
Yeah, and the time thing is the big thing, because it looks like nothing's going to get done before the election. And then if he's elected, all of that goes away, I assume.
He would have the power to make the federal trials go away, although apparently the special prosecutor has said that he will continue right up until January 20. We could be in court in October. We could be in court in December with the president-elect in the docket, because there's no immunity for the president-elect. So that would be an interesting train wreck of a situation, but it's a possible situation.
The other thing about the immunity thing, and then we'll move on, it seems that the Biden administration and the Democrats would have an opportunity here to use these new powers. They're ignoring it, and they're saying that we would never do that and all of that. I don't know if that's a good idea or not. They're basing it on principle, but what do you think of that?
Well, they certainly could. I mean, there's been a lot of memes on Facebook with Joe Biden calling SEAL Team 6 and saying, take the son of a gun out. Now, Joe Biden may very well be the biggest beneficiary of this decision, because we'll keep Trump from prosecuting him if Trump is elected, and Trump is likely going to do something like that. And it's hard for the Democrats to argue that Trump is an existential threat to democracy and then use the same tools that they believe are improperly now being given to Trump. So there's some political issues there. The biggest thing is that they've lost the opportunity, the initiative in the media to talk about how this empowers him and enhances the threat, because there was another issue that dominated the news last week.
Right. The debate, obviously.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk more about the immunity thing, because I think it's tied to this Project 2025, but we're going to probably do a whole episode on that down the line. I want to do the Great Britain election today because it has impact on us, right?
There's implications for the United States, and there's been 3 elections in Europe that we should look at collectively. The first were the European Union parliamentary elections. Every nation in the European Union elected members to the European Parliament. That happened the first weekend in June. The candidates, who are generally described as far right, for the most part, were elected throughout Europe. Oddly enough, in the country that is considered the most far right, in Hungary, those candidates were not successful, but generally throughout Europe, they were. They were running on a platform of, let's slow down all this green business. We cannot change our economies and change our infrastructure quite this fast. And they were all vehemently anti-immigration. Here are some interesting statistics of the percentage of foreign-born citizens. In Sweden, it's 20%, and that's very evident, particularly outside of Stockholm, if you're in Gothenburg or other places. Every cab driver is an Arab immigrant, mostly from Syria, after the recent displacement and the war over there. In Germany, it's 18%, Belgium, 17%. The United States is right on the cusp. We're 15%, although most of our immigrants come from Latin America, not the Middle East. Spain's 15, the Netherlands 14, the UK is 14, France is 13. So they are reaching critical mass in Europe where anti-immigration has become a very, very important issue. The second election, which they do in two parts, was the French National Assembly. It was held last week. Again, parties generally defined as the far right finished first. There'll be a second runoff on Sunday to see exactly how many parliamentary seats they get. Macron's party, the Center Party, ran third. Once again, very keyed on anti-immigration, very keyed on being, somewhat more Eurosceptic. The difference between the far right in Europe and maybe the far right here, although that difference is now being fudged, anti-immigrant, anti-world integration, globalism, anti-green policies, and they seem to be much more pro-Russian and anti-interventionist in Ukraine in Europe, although you see that in the far right in the Congress here, at least 46 members of the Congress.
Right.
So there we stand. And then yesterday we had the British election. Conservatives have been in power for 14 years. Conservatives were absolutely decimated. There were three aspects to that. The Scottish National Party, which won many Labour seats, collapsed. Labour reclaimed those seats. The Conservative Party collapsed. Helping that was the fact that Nigel Farage and his Reform Party took about 13% of the vote, which was enough to cause the Conservatives to lose in the way the elections are held there, and many of the seats Conservatives traditionally have held. The issues in the election, the status of the economy, Labour ran to the right of the Conservatives on immigration. They want to stop the boats coming from France. Labour stopped talking about raising taxes. Labour abandoned most of its 1930s socialism that has defined the party in the era of Neil Kinnock and Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn himself was kicked out of the party because of his anti-Semitism. A pro-Russian candidate was kicked out of the party during the campaign. Labour did a quick pivot to the center and ran as a more moderate new Labour, much the way Tony Blair did back in the 90s, to achieve a substantial victory. What are the lessons for the United States? Well, a couple. I think anti-immigration and a rising resistance to mandated green policies, particularly electric cars, is manifesting itself there. I think it's going to manifest itself here, if not this election, soon. Certainly, anti-immigration is going to be a number one issue this year. Number two, the economy. In England, the incumbent party was punished because its policies failed to deliver. And here is the irony. The reason why the economy in England was slow there was the pandemic. It was slow to get out of the pandemic. But it was also because of Brexit. It disengaged from its European trading partners. It went anti-globalism, if you will. It had to redo all of its laws for food purity and everything else. And that caused an economic slump, travel, immigration, trade that hit England. Now, voters will say, well, you didn't implement Brexit properly with enough enthusiasm. But I think what we see is that, you can write laws, you can repeal laws, but you can't repeal the laws of economics. And when you have an integrated economy and you try and pull out, it really doesn't work very well. And I think that's a lesson in America relative to tariffs and both parties trying to advance those policies. But the lesson there is that the incumbent party was punished for the economy. Now, here's the thing. If you magically waved a wand and all of Joe Biden's problems relative to his age magically went away, he's still 20 points behind Trump on the issue of the economy and on the issue of immigration. So the European elections, while they have lessons, the Democrats would be wise to adopt the Labour approach to how to run a campaign. The lessons are not necessarily good for an incumbent party.
Right. Putin has to be happy as can be with all of these changes in Europe.
He could not be happier. He practically endorsed Trump at a press conference this week. Orban from Hungary has broken ranks with the other European EU leaders. He's in Moscow as we speak. He's celebrating the implosion of Joe Biden during the debate. He is celebrating the wins of the far right throughout Europe. It is a disaster for the free world if this continues.
Yeah, and that could have effects on the Ukraine situation and also on a wider scale, NATO.
Absolutely. And in the France election, which will be decided on Sunday, far right there, Marie Le Pen is much more pro Russia than is Macron. And that could make a big change there. To their credit, the Labour Party in Britain has backed off. They have been historically, much like the Democrats here, pro-Ukraine and supportive of Ukraine. So it won't be as big an issue there. But Nigel Farage, with his 13 seats, he very much is a non-interventionist in Ukraine.
Well, I think you will agree with me that they do this at their own peril.
Well, absolutely. Having just been in Europe, I will tell you, the people in Latvia keep a go bag in case of an invasion. And our tour guide, who was a school psychology counselor, he's in the reserves. They train once a month to repel an invasion. The people in Poland, who have Ukraine on their border, understand very, very strongly the importance of beating Russia in Ukraine and the importance of America to that effort. And they watch our elections very, very carefully to make sure that we're not getting wobbly. Germany is very concerned, is increasing its military support. And Germany and Poland, I mean, our Polish guide told us, we don't want to do the euro because it's controlled in Frankfurt. And we're very concerned about Germany having too much influence in Poland. Well, they're getting together militarily now because they recognize that support of Ukraine is in their national interest.
So world politics is going to become an issue here as well in the upcoming years, obviously.
It is. And one of the reasons why this is allowed to happen is because of the vacuum of American leadership and determination. And when people see America get wobbly, they get wobbly.
That's what's happening in Europe. We got one more issue, right?
There is a name for this issue. There's a TED Talk about it. It's in business case studies. The escalating commitment to a losing course of action. And that is how the Biden attempt to stay in office is being described. The two biggest examples of an escalating commitment to a losing course of action are the Vietnam War and Kodak's commitment to film, trying to determine its corporate history. Both of them were mistakes. Biden has been dying the death of 1,000 cuts. 74% of Americans, including half of the Democrats, believe he is too old to be president. Trump has picked up 6 points across the board. And now you have the threshold question of his ability to govern. And you can't really get to other issues of, why I support one candidate versus the other if you believe one is incapable of governing. While the losses have been, within a few points across the board, also in the battleground states, new battleground states have moved into play. Virginia, New Hampshire, New Mexico, and Minnesota are now all within a single digit. And some of them in one poll had Trump ahead in New Hampshire. So you've got some significant issues there. The Republican convention will be July 15. Historically, Trump would get a bump coming out of that. Biden is going to go on with George Stephanopoulos, a former Clinton White House advisor, to try and salvage his presidency today. But nobody believes that a single interview is going to make people unsee what they saw.
Right.
The drumbeat of Democrats behind the scenes is apparently described as scores of Democrats by PBS. So the sooner and with the more clarity and with the more dignity that President Biden, I think, figures out that he needs to step aside, the better it will be for the Democrats to be able to order a process. And as you know, I have long said that the first party to nominate somebody not named Trump or Biden will be the party that wins the election. They have an opportunity to do that. Because here's the thing. It's his mental acuity. He's going to get older every day between now and the end of the next 4 years. And nobody, it's one thing to be in a room with Jake Tapper and Donald Trump. It's another thing to be in a room with, Putin or North Korea or China. That is tremendously compromised. And I think many Democrats are reaching the decision that we need to sort of throw in the towel. And I think they're right. And I think for the good of America, for the good of the free world, for the good of President Biden, let's remember that President Roosevelt, as popular and as an effective a president as there ever was, ran for a fourth term when he was severely ill. He went to Yalta and perhaps gave away too much to Stalin. He died in April following his January inauguration. He was 63 years old. After that, by the way, the country passed a constitutional amendment prohibiting anybody from being elected for more than 2 terms. My guess is that after this election, there will be a constitutional amendment prohibiting anybody from being president if they're 80 years old or older. because I think everybody's sort of seeing what that is. And, Trump wasn't much better. He was articulate. His sentences were more or less complete. His thoughts were false. But he's getting a pass because Biden looks worse.
I hate to wave our own flag, but I'm going to do it. We talked about age in the very first episode of this podcast, and now it's come to roost.
Well, it really has. And, the congressman from Minnesota who ran, he deserves to be some credit for recognizing that and being willing to put his hat in the ring. And, the other guy who was vindicated is Robert Hur, the general special counsel, whose report said we're not going to prosecute Joe Biden because he's sort of a doddering old grandfather.
Right.
Well, that conclusion has been validated. Those who have, like us, who have been waving that and pointing that issue out, I think are in fact vindicated.
Well, we will see, and we will probably know more next week, although we thought we were going to know more this week, but you never know.
This week's not over yet.
That's true. We'll know more next week about what the path of the Democratic Party will be in terms of Joe Biden. But another great episode. Have we covered everything?
I think we've got it this week. Busy week.
Okay, buddy. Thank you for joining us on another edition of Red versus Blue.
Thanks, everybody.